What would you as Premier do to address the issue of urban Aboriginal youth?
So first of all, it's a great question and a very important question, and one that I contemplated a good deal during my year and a half as Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, because we do tend to have, as a provincial government, a preoccupation with those who live on reserve versus those who live off reserve. Not by design, but I think it's kind of the nature of the work that the ministry does, that we tend to be dealing with the bodies, the band councils for the roughly 200 Indian bands that exist in British Columbia. They tend to be the ones who we work with, and we may be working with them on treaty discussions. That's certainly true. We've tried to do a few things. So I should talk a bit about the on reserve and then the off reserve, because you're right, I think it's somewhere between 60 and 70% of Aboriginal people in British Columbia now live off reserve. So many live in the city of Vancouver, Prince George, Kelowna, Kamloops, but a very large percentage now are off reserve. And they tend not to have distinctive political voices now. There used to be the UNA, which I guess for all intents and purposes is currently defunct. So it tends to be the Aboriginal Friendship Centres that tend to be the voice of Aboriginal people off reserve, but they too have quite strong linkages to reserve. So we do need to, I think, work with the federal government to establish better ways of relating to urban Aboriginal people, i.e. off-reserve Aboriginal people, as we do with on-reserve Aboriginal. Because I think the same is true for the federal government, that their preoccupation tends to be with on-reserve rather than off-reserve, and in fact, their general approach to the province has been, once Aboriginal people move off reserve, they are the responsibility of the provincial government in terms of social programming and educational and health and other programs. So I think the apprehension is a fair one, that there is an inordinate preoccupation with the on-reserve versus off-reserve. So I think the federal and provincial governments have tried to do some good things with respect to dealing with that. The Transformative Change Accord was an example of that. It was a pretty principled document which called on the federal and provincial governments to work more closely together on issues of health and education, social services, and try to break down that gap between the on-reserve and off-reserve Aboriginal people. I think we've made some progress there, but not very much progress. I think the promise of the Transformative Change Accord, the First Nations Health Accord, and some of those other transformative documents, I think those much of the potential of those accords remains to be realized, and it is something that I would intend to give priority to, just as I did when I was Minister of Aboriginal Relations.